Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome to another live stream with Hamish McLay of Search and Convey, myself, Gareth Wax, and many purple hats. I should say that henceforth this slot shall be known as Property Matters. And in fact, there's a new logo on the way to show exactly that. Today, we're talking filth. That's what we're talking. We're talking nasty stuff. We're talking about all that stuff that most people would rather not talk about, are we not, Hamish?
Well, yes. I mean, strangely, there's a lot more of it about than we actually sort of think. And it was James, our guest today, who actually explained to me that how many properties there are on the island. He can tell us. I'm sure he can tell us when he actually sort of gets there. But James Warren, with his off-main solutions, can actually bring this subject up. I was speaking to one of my colleagues from Wales earlier today and said, how did you get, what does it happen in Wales over much? And he said to me, absolute bane in my life, because he used to do research work on drainage and water, used to produce drainage and water searches. And he said it was terrible. He said, if somebody didn't tell you, you didn't know that somebody was off mains. And
that is my cue to bring in the off-main champion himself, James Warren of Off-Main Solutions.
Good afternoon. How are we?
Well, fabulous. I'm very pleased to have you here. We don't normally get to talk about at this lower level, as it were. Sorry, they're going to keep coming. You're going to have to just put up with it. I'm sorry, James.
Not at all. You go for it.
But fundamentally, James deals with cesspits and the holding of effluent. Is that the nice way of putting it?
That's effluent. One way of putting it, yes.
Certainly, yes, absolutely. The brown sludgy stuff, etc., that people rather not talk about and rather under normal conditions be flushed away. But where there's good portions, as Hamish has already mentioned, of the countryside which do not have that as an option. Hamish, absolutely. Is this some sort of thing that you've come up with all the time?
Strangely enough, I don't, because I don't get involved with drainage and water searches directly. I only get involved with those indirectly. But I did live in a property in the Thames Valley, not terribly far away from where James is based. And it was and this is the strangest of things. It was deep in the murky depths of the Thames Valley. It was just outside Wallingford. A lovely little place called Molesford, about 200 yards from the Thames, and they weren't connected up to the mains for drainage.
That seems nuts. Why would that be? James, I'm going to throw you under the bus. I'm going to throw James straight under the bus. And James, why are there many properties that are this close to normal conurbations that have got actual no connection to normal main sewerage?
Yeah, I mean, typically we are talking about rural and semi-rural areas where there are no mains drainage whatsoever. But yeah, you can get built up areas where you have off-mains drainage systems. It may be because of when the properties were built versus when the main sewer was actually installed. It may be that the main sewer is already at capacity and it can't take any more fresh, or maybe not fresh, but new connections. But more times than not, you are looking at semi-rural and rural areas of the UK where these off-mains or self-contained private drainage systems are going to be found.
And are more being built? Have we come to stasis, or is this still ongoing?
It maintains. I mean, the last record showed that 4% of UK housing stock was not connected to main sewerage. So that 4% equates to about 1,050,000 properties. And that proportion at 4% seems to be maintaining its status quo as new properties get built. So yes, I mean, it's always going to be a tiny minority against the overall housing stock. But, you know, those million plus properties need a legal provision of drainage. And there are a few different options, but there are lots, as we're no doubt going to talk about. There's lots of different regulations that need to be adhered with when designing these and then physically installing them.
So a little bit of history. When did it? I mean, there was a time 100 or so years ago when it was quite common to be off main. When did the tide turn?
That's a good question. So 20s, 30s, 40s, main sewers were getting more commonplace. And it stems on the flip side of it. You'd have the old septic tanks emptied by horse and cart and buckets.
Yes.
It's a little bit more advanced now. But it's really, as we built further into the country, it's more self-contained, and as we get in the more built up areas, they had to have a better long-term sewage provision. And to be fair, even though my entire world and my entire business is off main solutions, I'm the first person to speak to a customer to say, if there's the option to go on mains, take it. You know, if you're future-proofing the drainage system, it's far better. There's less liability on you. Off mains drainage systems are lovely if they're working perfectly, but they can be very expensive very quickly if they go wrong.
Wow. Hamish.
Right. I mean, one of the challenges that we sort of come across in the industry generally about sort of conveyancing is educating people, which is one of the reasons why I do welcome something like James to sort of come along, because there will be solicitors from time to time who are not familiar with the appropriate way to go or won't speak to the right people. I think there's a few disaster stories out there which are really sort of quite worrying, because somebody who's going to buy a property does really need to know. I think, and from what I can understand, and I'm sure James can actually explain to us, it's difficult to understand who is actually responsible ultimately for advising this potential buyer of this new property of the fact that it is off mains and off main solutions they require. And there's all the varying types. I think we perhaps speak about those another time, but just to get the general sort of picture, I think if James can actually sort of let us know who does tell that potential buyer.
Well, as I am told by all my legal connections, the honesty of the seller comes to the fore about saying they must state what drainage system they are on. They must state if they're connected or not. But unfortunately, the complete onus, as I've been told 1,000 times over, is on the purchaser. Certainly in England, not so much in Scotland. I had a client from Scotland the other day. The onus was upon them as the seller to make sure all the information was beautifully gift wrapped and passed on to the purchaser. But in England, it's the other way around. So yeah, it's absolutely the case. I wrote a questionnaire, which I think I've emailed out to about 350 conveyancers and solicitors so far, to really help with the transaction process, to make sure that no information slips through the net, if I can phrase it like that. And it's really to help identify very quickly on or off mains what the system is, who's liable, what needs to happen, where is it located, all the basics that we probably think should be out in the ether anyway, but they rarely are. And I'm trying to get awareness out there to address this, what the system is, where it is, etc., as early as possible in the transaction process. The nightmare stories that Hamish refers to are typically either after exchange or just before it's found out there's an off-mains drainage system. Everyone's jumping up and down wanting it surveyed, and you just have to keep your fingers crossed that nothing is found that's negative or non-compliant. Because if it is, and there's money to be spent to put it right, you've got next to no time to renegotiate the purchase price, and it gets very sticky very quickly. I must say, though, just recently, that's not happening at all. I think awareness is out there now, and these systems are being assessed a lot earlier in the transaction process.
So, without wishing to ask you to relay any particularly filthy details, can you give me an example of a horror story that can happen? I don't want to put the wind up people, but it can be quite entertaining. Go on, do tell.
Well, from a physical perspective, the worst one from a sort of aesthetic point of view is where there's a perfect storm of ground conditions, torrential rainfall, sustained torrential rainfall, so the ground is absolutely sodden. The tank or sewage treatment plant is due its annual empty. The contents are physically sucked away by one of these big vacuum tankers, and then you realise that the only thing keeping that tank in the ground was the weight of the contents. So once it's removed, this vessel, as it is underground, wants to either pop out the ground or collapse, and sometimes they can physically come all the way out of their original excavation and just come to rest by the side of it. So that is a quite extreme version. That's all about hydrostatic pressure. And a lot of these modern vessels from the 60s onwards are made of fiberglass or glass reinforced plastic. similar to a hull of a boat. So they're exceptionally good at floating, and that's what they want to do.
To just
Yeah.
pop out.
They just pop out, yeah. And they only have to rise by a couple of inches for the connecting pipework to disconnect, and then the system won't work anyway. But the more extreme versions are where they literally come out the ground, and it is quite a common occurrence.
Really? Good Lord. Good Lord. What about those ancient ones from Victorian times? Because a
lot of those are still bulletproof.
Those are built, aren't they?
We do, yeah, compliance checks, pre-purchase surveys, wherever it may be. You go back 100 years. Admittedly, they won't adhere to current sizing requirements, but they'll still be, from a condition perspective, they'll still be absolutely bulletproof. Brick and block work, beautifully built, and yeah, there might be a bit of aged maintenance-related damage, but as a main structure, a lot of them are still bulletproof. It's amazing. Obviously, exceptionally well built in the time.
So, would you say that modern 60s containers are potentially more fault-ridden than the old original Victorian structures?
That's a brilliant question. I think in the old days, where the structure was the entire installation, from the 60s onwards, where it's more these sort of thicker reinforced plastic structures, it's more to do with how they're installed, the quality of installation, the materials beneath and around the asset, and that will give longevity to the system itself. So it's not so much the product, it's the quality of installation and the installation materials. But some installed in the 60s, we look at 60s installs on the GRP tanks, and some of those are still absolutely fine. But unfortunately, they can be damaged by various means. So a lot of them have been replaced if they were put in that early in the 60s.
Wow. Hamish, do you come across problems that are caused by buyers not realizing what the import of having a partially off-grid setup is?
Well, we're actually in a, I should say, fun position in that respect, because it's beyond our brief. What we will actually sort of do, and this was one of the interesting things that Mahesh, who actually is in Wales, and said that when they used to carry out the drainage and water searches, because they used to do the drainage and water searches for certain solicitors, that there was always this danger that they couldn't find it, they weren't aware of it. The situations I've come across, and they're highly amusing, and I think the best of it was, and this has happened on several properties. I used to do an awful lot. I would actually tend to go, initially I would always go to the provider, whether it be Thames Water, whether it be Essex, or any of these different sort of places. But I used to find it in Thames Water the world's worst, because they say, and they call it a lost property, because the person was paying them for the use, but there was no record of what the connections actually sort of were. So Thames Water had to go in and see if there was any pipe work there. I mean, I don't know if they had anybody in, but it was absolutely peculiar, because they call it a lost property, and it could take weeks and months to actually get a report out of them, for them to actually find out where, in fact, everything went.
So was there a danger that you could buy a property and no one would know that there was in fact a septic tank hidden deep down in the earth nearby?
There's also the private sewage, and I have come across that one where it was private sewage undertaker rather than the main one, and there was a particular sort of group who were responsible for the maintenance of. So anything that went wrong, they would have to pay this particular sort of group. I think it was a group of about 8 or 10 sort of properties. I can't even remember where it was now. Might have been in East Anglia. But fortunately, if you like, I mean, the sort of work that James is doing now, trying to educate people about it, also contacting the solicitors, because it was, I don't know if there's a national network at all. I mean, James can actually, I think you can advise, James, can't you? Anywhere in the UK, really, never mind just England and Wales, or you can get people.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I work with about 110 contractors and surveyors. So any complexity, any situation, any postcode, I can cover. That's not a problem. I was going to go back just one stage. I haven't really come across many dynamics where a property has been confused as to whether it's on or off mains. But a very common occurrence is a mislabeling or misinformation of what the actual off-mains drainage system is. More times than not, people say they've got a septic tank as a kind of catch-all reference, where in fact it might be a cesspit. It might actually be a septic tank, or it might be a treatment plant. So you have to take everything with a pinch of salt. But first things first, I haven't really seen a complete mislabeling of whether they're connected to Thames Water, for example, or whether they've got their own off-mains drainage system.
What's the difference between a cesspit and a septic tank?
Cesspit is just a massive holding tank with no exit or outlet pipe. So it just fills up and needs to be emptied. And if it's sized appropriately, you need to empty that between 6 and 8 times a year, so it can get really expensive. A septic tank is a much smaller asset, but it does have an exit pipe. So the septic tank will create separation, and then the drainage field or the soakaway dispersal system on the back end will be where the treatment occurs. So you don't need as much of a physical footprint to play with if you're going to have a septic tank, but you must have a nice piece of permeable ground for the dispersal to work. Whereas a cesspit, you throw it in, and as long as you've got enough room, it's fine. The issue is, though, if ever there's a structural breach, you've got untreated foul effluent going straight to ground. So it's not a very popular choice.
Well, it used to be popular, did it? There was a crossover point, I'm guessing.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's really when there was limited option. If you wanted to build a property and there was no permeable ground and no main sewer, and you needed a legal provision of drainage, then at least you have that cesspit as that kind of that backup option. But they're expensive to buy, expensive to install, and because you have to just keep empty them more and more times each year, it's very expensive for the upkeep. So they're not a great option.
I'm about to wind this up for today, but before I do, can I have from you perhaps a bit of advice to someone out there who is potentially looking at an off-mains property? Should that be a thing that detracts them from potentially buying it?
I don't think so. As long as we know where it is, what it is, its condition, its capacity, adequacy, where it's discharging, is it functional, is it compliant? I know that sounds a lot, but that's about a 1-hour check to tick all those boxes. If it's working beautifully, then they're amazing systems that don't cost very much.
Hamish, as usual, I'll leave the last words on the topic to yourself.
Well, I mean, one of the opportunities I have as a collaborator in terms of the work that I do is being able to meet experts out there. I mean, all too often we sort of find people who don't know where to go for the information.
Quite.
Great thing about bringing somebody like James. Not only can he tell us about, I picked up so much just from what James has said, as far as I'm concerned, that I can be aware of, but I'm also in a better position. And anybody listening who actually sort of looks in, they know exactly the sort of person they need to speak to. And it's certainly, and that's including the solicitors who are actually listening and this as well. But James is an absolute such a useful sort of contact from their perspective, because they know they will get actually looked after by him. And that's clearly what's important. And I do like the way James has said, hey, look, and this is why I think it was a good question to ask. If it's working effectively, it's fine. It's when it's not. But James can find out. James can let you know.
I've often said the mark of any business relationship or personal relationship is when things aren't going to plan. That's when you find out what people are really made of. And I think on that note, I wish to thank you today, James, for taking the time out to be with us. Hamish, as ever, for helping put together such a great mini quorum. A shameless plug. At 10 o'clock on Thursdays, we hold the property quorum, which is myself, chairing Hamish, Juliet Babulal, and Chris Gilson, who is a property developer. Juliet is a renowned property lawyer, and we often have special guests. I'm hoping, James, you'll say a yes to coming along to that at some point.
It's a given. Of course, it's a yes.
Thank you very much. Well, look, until the next time we meet, and thank you all of you guys who are patiently listening in to what we have to say. We're going to be making more of a fuss about both Property Matters and Property Quorum, and we very much like you to play a part in helping direct, so we can talk about topics that actually mean something to you. we can't guarantee to talk any less shit, but we will certainly talk about stuff that is convenient to you. I had to slip one in there somewhere, did I not?
It was good, very smooth.
Thank you. One tries one's best. So I wish everybody out there a wonderful weekend, and of course, excellent mental health. Bye bye now.